fighting for
1941, a date which will live.
Note that the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima.
These forces met their match.
We have declared the war in
but we don't plan to surrender either.
We are going to win.
Proportions and would lead to World War III.
Allied air forces began an attack on military
Decide that in the 21st century that America...
March 5th, 2052, the United States has officially closed.
The United States will go ahead with a national quarantine. The new plague virus.
Disaster sweeping
Right here, pull over. All right, ain't nothing in there.
War never changes. It was the inevitable result of the path humanity had chosen. Everyone who entered into the conflict expected victory. Everyone was optimistic. But as the hostilities escalated, optimism faded, and society began to collapse. The great vaults were built to house the wealthy, the powerful, the influential, and those deemed necessary to their survival. Inside, resources and technology were stockpiled, a final defense against the coming Holocaust. With the past behind them and the present destroyed, they looked to the future. The sturdy Vault Zero was to be the nucleus of the Vault network, housing the greatest leaders, artists, and scientists. The inhabitants of Vault Zero were to reunite the vaults and lead the people to a new life, a new world. But after the bombs, the world would be a harsh one. To ensure the creation of a post-nuclear utopia, the Vault dwellers would need help. Machinery was constructed to tame a land hardened by the ravages of war, then tempered by nuclear winter. But plans were barely in place when the first missiles left the silos. During the destruction, communication between the vaults ceased. Entire vaults were lost. Those that survived were on their own. Not all vaults succumbed to the machinations of war. On North America's west coast, one group of military vault dwellers emerged almost unscathed. They surveyed the wasteland and squared their shoulders for the task ahead. These dedicated survivors salvaged the technology from the vaults. Technology that was studied, replicated, and fiercely guarded. For they knew that while their power came from numbers, their future lay in scientific knowledge. In time, they formed the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood used their knowledge to drive back the atrocities of the wasteland, proclaiming themselves the technological saviors of mankind. They scoured the land in search of more technology, raiding mutant camps, bandit towns, and the broken remains of other vaults. But even they could not keep pace with the high tolls demanded by life in the wasteland. The Brotherhood found themselves at odds with their need for new blood versus their code of technological secrecy. The debate was lengthy. Finally, the elders ruled against sharing the technology with outsiders, convinced that they would endure as they had before. Further discussion was discouraged, and the elders ordered the minority on a mission across the wastes. Super mutants, the foot soldiers of a conquered army, had been forced into a retreat across the mountainous barrier to the east. The Brotherhood constructed airships and dispatched the minority to track down and assess the extent of the remaining super mutant threat. But disaster struck while crossing the Great Mountains. A great storm gripped the main airship and flung it far from its course. The mighty ship was badly damaged. The smaller sections were torn from the main craft, never to be seen again. Many of the expedition's leaders were lost to the winds. The fraction of the crew that still survived struggled to keep their ship aloft before finally crashing on the outskirts of a once thriving metropolis. A city once called Chicago. Broken, scattered, and scarred, they took stock of the situation and once again squared their shoulders to the task ahead. The Brotherhood had much to offer the surrounding villages. They traded advanced medicines in exchange for food and labor. They traded protection from bandits in exchange for new recruits. In time, their ranks began to swell. Separated by distance and ideology from the main Brotherhood forces, the minority was free to forge a new Brotherhood of Steel, one that reflected the ideals they had strived for all along. However, one's future in the wasteland is never certain, for an old power has awakened, also bent on making this land its own. Life in the Brotherhood is about to change.
Okay. Hello, my dear friends. My name is Amadeus, and welcome to Fallout Tactics Brotherhood of Steel. Man, Fallout Tactics. So, this game occupies kind of an interesting place in the Fallout franchise. It's kind of the black sheep of the family. First of all, this game is a real-time / turn-based strategy RPG. So it differs from its siblings in that respect right away. It is also not canonical in regards to the Fallout overall narrative. So this game is supposed to take place after the events of Fallout 1 and 2. As was alluded to by the cutscene we just watched, the super mutants are sort of migrating across the country following the death of the Master. But all of that stuff about Vault Zero and the offshoot chapter of the Brotherhood of Steel that crash-landed and sort of started creating a less insular and more democratized Brotherhood of Steel. All of that lore is not canon, I believe, to the Fallout universe, so there's that as well. And this game also didn't perform very well commercially. I don't think. This game came out in 2001 for PC, and by 2008 it had only sold around 300,000 copies. So not fantastic in terms of its commercial success either. I'm not sure if the creative leads of this game were involved in any of the other Fallout titles, but we certainly didn't see a sequel to Tactics. So for all those reasons, this game is kind of an interesting... It's a bit of an outlier in terms of the Fallout franchise. But that being said, if you enjoy games of this type, squad-based, real-time strategy games, then this game is going to be right up your alley. If you're a fan of games like XCOM or Phoenix Point, then you'll be a fan of Fallout Tactics. This is a really solid entry into that genre, if that makes sense. So it's a game that I've really enjoyed playing. It's challenging. It sort of harkens back to a time where games were less forgiving of the player not knowing what they were doing. It's a game that doesn't really hold your hand, so I'm very excited to be playing it again, and very excited also to be able to share the experience that is Fallout Tactics with all of you. So that being said, we will jump right in and start a new single-player campaign. So, first things first, we get to either select or create our player character. And this game comes equipped with a handful of pre-made characters that you can choose from. So you've got Mick, Snake, Peter, Betty, Wilma, and I believe that's it, yeah. And each of the pre-made characters come with a backstory here that has a little bit of flavor text that sort of alludes to what they're good at, and then of course you can see their character details in the middle of the screen, their special distribution, their tag skills, etc. Now, I don't really like any of the pre-made characters. I've always found that the pre-made characters are inefficient, for lack of a better word. They're not like min-maxed, you know what I mean? So we're going to go ahead and create our own character, just so that we can sort of give ourselves the strongest start possible. Like I said, this game is quite challenging, so we want to come out of the gate strong so that we can sort of snowball our early success and make things a little bit easier on ourselves going ahead. So this is the character creation screen, and for fans of the franchise, it'll be pretty familiar. Over here you have your special alignment with a standard 5 across the board, 5 points to spend. We get to choose 2 optional traits, and we get to tag 3 skills to specialize in. So we will start with our tag skills, and we want to go with small guns for obvious reasons, energy weapons, and doctor. And the reason being is that these are the skills that we will be relying upon the most for most of the game. So small guns goes without saying. Small guns are everything basically that aren't big guns. Handguns, rifles, some of the even weirder weapons like the spear launcher, stuff like that, all that counts under small guns. And we really want to do most of our fighting from as far away from the enemy as possible, which is the way I've found is the most effective way to deal with engagements while keeping your own casualties to a minimum. So we are going to build our character and our squad around units that have very strong ranged capabilities. So small guns is essential for us. We chose energy weapons because in the late game we will encounter enemy types that have fairly high physical resistance, so our ballistic weapons won't be as effective as we would like them to be. Really, the only thing that these enemies are somewhat susceptible to are energy-based weapons. So while we won't be relying on this skill early in the game, it's good to tag it now so that we can level it up quickly later in the game when we dump levels into it. And Doctor we're taking because, well, it's always good to be able to deal with damage because inevitably we're going to get injured. But there are two basic first aid or medical skills in the game. You have first aid and you have doctor. And as it says, first aid is effectively just the healing of basic injuries. So it affects how effective your stim packs are, how much you get out of other healing items, etc. Whereas doctor is effectively dedicated to dealing with crippled limbs and more serious status effects. So there is a laundry list of fun status ailments and crippled effects that you can contract in this game. You can be blinded, you can be concussed, you can be slowed, and all of them have fairly adverse effects on your character and how effective your character is going to be in combat. So having someone who is able to deal with those injuries when they come up is paramount. The other reason we're giving ourselves Doctor is because we want our character to effectively occupy the role of team medic in the game. So when you start this game, when you enter the first mission, you begin with 3 units in your squad. You begin with the character that you create, you begin with a dedicated marksman, and you begin with a dedicated medic character. And that character has very high first aid and doctor skills, but that is because they have a trait that enhances those skills at the expense of their combat skills. And that's not what I want. You only get 6 slots, you only get 6 squad mates maximum in this game, and we want everybody on our squad to be combat effective. I don't want to have to give up one of my potential combat slots for a dedicated medic who really is ineffectual when it comes down to a gunfight. So we'll be getting rid of him pretty quickly and replacing him with somebody with better combat abilities. And so because of that, we really want our character to be able to fulfill the role of medic fairly early on. Does that make sense? I hope so. So that's why we picked these 3 skills. Other skills to consider, big guns. Big guns are okay. Big guns deal a lot of damage, but the trade-off, of course, is that they're typically less accurate than small guns. And again, we want to be doing most of our fighting from as far away as possible. We're going to have a lot of snipers and ranged specialists in our party. So I might have someone who has a tagged big gun skill just so that we can use them, make the most use of the weapons and ammunition available to us. But it's not... I would say of the 2, small guns is a far better choice. Unarmed is trash for the reasons that I just spoke about. Don't even consider unarmed. Forget about it. Melee weapons... melee weapons can be viable, but the problem with melee weapons is that they drop off pretty heavily in the late game. Again, because we'll be dealing with enemies that have pretty high physical resistances. And also, they will have dedicated melee units. So, even if you don't end up being outclassed by the enemy, you will definitely end up being outgunned and outmanned. The unit density for the enemy units towards the end of the game is pretty intense. So even if you have a character who you've been dumping skills into his melee weapons skill, and they're reliably defeating enemies with their melee abilities, just by virtue of the way this game works, they're still going to be taking a whole lot of damage. So you'll be expending a lot of your healing resources just trying to keep them alive, which is not really what we want to end up having to do. So we're going to stay away from melee weapons ourselves. Throwing's okay. Grenades in this game, Molotov cocktails, other thrown weapons do work. So we're going to have someone on our team dedicated to who has a tagged throwing skill, just so we can make effective use of those. Again, first aid and doctor, we sort of want our character to cover the bulk of the healing in our party. And sneak, we'll be doing a little bit of sneaking. We will be leveling up sneak a little bit, but we won't be relying on it enough that I want to build a character around it or select units based on their sneak ability. Basically, we just want a little bit of sneak so that we can get our squad into a good position before opening up fire on the enemy, right? So we're not going to be intending to sneak past all the enemies or clear a map using stealth. We're going to go in with our guns. Basically, all we want to do is get into a superior position before engaging with the enemy, and that's what we'll be using sneak for. And then the rest of the skills here are, I guess you could say, tertiary skills. Lockpick, we'll be doing some lockpicking, so we'll put some levels in that on one of our characters. Steel, not really important. Traps, actually fairly important. Once you start encountering traps in this game, like landmines, etc., it really pays off to have someone who can reliably disarm them, because they really can be a headache, especially especially on one level where you have to like guide a vehicle through roads and they've trapped the road. It really pays off to have someone who can reliably deal with traps. So we'll probably have someone dedicated to putting some extra points into that skill as well. Science, not really important. Repair, kind of in the same vein as traps, because once we gain access to vehicles, having someone who can reliably repair the damage that your vehicles are inevitably going to incur is kind of important. Pilot, not super necessary. Driving in this game isn't... Basically, having a higher pilot skill just means that you can turn more efficiently when driving, which isn't really a huge problem, I've found. And barter, gambling, outdoorsmen are all pretty useless. So yeah, these are the essential skills that we want to rely on and that we want our squad to have tagged when we get around to picking additional squad mates. So moving on from that, we can pick two of the shown optional traits here, and of course some are just better than others. Like small frame, for example, isn't that bad. It increases your agility, which helps you with sneaking, although at the payoff for not being able to carry as much. One-hander is kind of a mixed bag, makes you really good with pistols. So if you want to like roleplay sort of a gunslinger character, then that one might be for you. But most of these, again, have a trade-off. Like one-hander makes you less effective with two-handed weapons. So you can browse through depending on the type of character you want. Some of these, like depending on the role-playing that you want to do, some of these are very like if you wanted to play a junkie character, something like that, you could go with chemical reliant or what have you. But the two skills that we are going to pick are the fast shot skill and the gifted skill. Fast shot, because it's just good. It's, I think, the only skill aside from like bloody mess on this list that doesn't really have a downside. All fast shot does effectively is make it so that it costs one less action point for you to attack with any sort of ranged weapon, which is huge. Basically every action that you take in this game, you have to expend action points for, which is basically your stamina, for those who aren't familiar with Fallout terminology. So because we're going to be, as I have said a couple times now, predominantly ranged base in terms of our combat strategy, being able to just outshoot the enemy is huge. That's a huge benefit for us. So we're going to go with fast shot just because it's just a good perk. I would recommend it for anyone. The other perk we're going to go with is Gifted. And Gifted is an interesting one. So Gifted gives you +1 to each of your primary attributes. It gives you +1 to all of your special stats. The trade-off is that you lose 10% of all of your skills and you receive 5 less skill points per level. And that, I know that sounds like a pretty egregious trade-off for just a few extra special points, but the way this game works is that your primary attributes actually have a larger impact on your performance than your skills do, at least at the beginning of the game. Now, I know that doesn't sound particularly intuitive, but effectively what that means is that having... So perception, for example, affects accuracy, sequence and ranged combat distance modifiers. So having a higher perception will have a greater impact on your performance in a firefight than dumping skills into your small guns skill. And again, perception affects accuracy with all weapons, big weapons, energy weapons, and small guns. So this kind of balances out in the late game when you've got a bunch of levels and you've really had time to sink points into your preferred skills. But certainly at the beginning of the game, having higher special abilities will serve you far better than having a few extra skill points, if that makes sense. So, and this is minus 10% to your current skill value, not just like a base 10%. So it'll be minus 10% of 45 when we take it. So you'll be able to see when I select it. I got a +1 all throughout here. And, oh, I didn't. There we go. I don't know what's happening there. But I got a +1 to my specials. And you can see that my skill values took a hit. But down from 45% to 39% isn't a huge detriment. Like, it's only minus 10%. Anything less than 50% is not great, but once you get over 50% in a skill, you can it becomes pretty reliable. And again, having 9 perception will more than make up for having a slightly below average small gun skill at level 1. So we've got our traits, we've got our skills. We'll finish allocating our special stats. So we're going to keep 9 perception, strength is good at 6, endurance is good at 6. We'll take a couple of points out of charisma, just because charisma is really the only primary attribute that doesn't have any impact on our combat performance. So it says right here, affects NPC reactions and barter prices. So not really worried about those. Again, more worried about how we're going to perform in battle. One other thing that charisma does affect that they don't really tell you about is the recruitment pool. So between missions, you get to go back to base, and that's where you do all of your like inventory management, your shopping, but it's also where you get to change out your squad mates. And you recruit new squad mates from a recruitment pool that gets better with each as you progress through the game. The higher your charisma skill, the more quickly you will have access to better recruits to add to your roster. However, we want to get our primary squad mates early on in the game so that we get the most control over how they level. So as you level up and progress in the game, the recruits that you can pick from your roster will also start at higher levels, which is fine, but it means that they will have predetermined perks. If we get our preferred squad mates early on in the game, that means that they can level up with us, and we get more control over how they grow as units. So, long story short, not super worried about charisma. Intelligence, you can bump up intelligence if you want, just to sort of offset taking the gifted perk, because the higher your intelligence, the more skill points you get when you level up. But again, I'm not super worried about it. 6 is fine. We're going to sink our last 4 points, 2 into agility, again, because we want to we are going to be doing some sneaking, so we want to have a little bit of better sneaking at the beginning of the game, especially since Gifted reduced our sneak skill down to 14. And we're going to put the last 2 into luck, just so that we get a higher chance of critical hits during gunfights. So, that's going to be our stat alignment. Pretty solid for the beginning of the game, very combat focused, high accuracy, some sneak, some advanced crit, paired with the fast shot skill. That's a pretty solid way to enter the game. So the last things we can do is customize our character a little bit, so we can adjust his portrait here, and I love the portraits that you have access to in this game. I think they did a really good job of making them look like wastelanders, you know, because these are, I'm pretty sure these are just pictures of people that have been like doctored after the fact to make them look more like they are from the wasteland, you know, like they added fake hair and, you know, additional features and jewelry and stuff like that to make them look a little more weathered. But some of them are pretty crazy looking. So you got a several fun portraits to choose from, but I think we'll go with this guy just because he looks tough, but he doesn't look like a total psychopath. You know what I mean? So I think we'll go with him, and we can change our like other aesthetic attributes. So we can change our pigmentation. We can change our hair and our primary color. This guy looks like he's bald, but I don't think there's a bald option in terms of hair. So we'll just go blonde, I guess. And our primary color, like, aesthetics don't matter at all on the game, so you don't really have to spend a lot of time on this. Not that you really have a lot of options as far as customization goes anyways, but your primary color will dictate how easy it is to pick out your character on the game map. So you want something that's not too subtle, like steel doesn't look too bad, but it's very subdued. So I think we're gonna go with blue. It's a good Brotherhood of Steel color, and it'll make our character identifiable once we get onto the map. Oh, and I'll mention Tough Guy briefly. Tough Guy, you can select if you want. It's basically this game's version of Iron Man mode. It restricts your saving so that you can only save at the bunker. So between missions, you can't save during missions. The trade-off for that is that you get double XP. So it's very high risk, high reward. We're not going to be doing a Tough Guy playthrough because this game is challenging, and I have no problem with save scumming. Like, this game is old enough and janky enough that not only is it challenging, but sometimes, like, you'll misclick or something will react unpredictably, and you'll just end up in with a problem on your hands that, you know, is more a consequence of the game than of you not playing well. So we're not going to go Tough Guy mode. And the last thing we need to do is, I guess, give ourselves a name. So let's go with Dom. Because he's, well, he doesn't really look like Vin Diesel, but he's bald like Vin Diesel, so Dom, I think, works. The first thing that came to my mind. We'll give him a new age because he looks a bit older than 19. That'll do it. He looks about 30, right? We'll be a guy, and you can't change your race. You can't play as like a ghoul or a super mutant or anything like that. You are able to, however, recruit ghouls and super mutants to your squad later on in the game. And you can even recruit Deathclaws onto your team, because at this point in the franchise, Deathclaws could still speak. So that's kind of fun. But we'll get to that. We'll talk more about that when we get to that point in the story. For now, I think this is good. We've got a pretty strong character to start the game with, so I'm happy with this, and I think we can move along.